Welcome everyone to our special board meeting for Wednesday, June the 24th. I'm going to call the meeting to order. And do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none, I just want to add to our agenda. It's a suggested motion from Student Trustee Mesere that I'd like to add after Nora's school opening update. And how we would deal with that is a student trustee can't bring forward a motion, so it's going to be a suggested motion. I'm going to allow Sally to speak to it, but I will then need it to be moved for a discussion amongst trustees. It will have to be moved by a member of the board and also seconded by a member of the board to move forward after that. But I would like to give her an opportunity to speak to it before we get to that stage. Is everyone okay with that? If we add that to the agenda? Okay, looks like everyone's good. So we'll add that to, that'll be 3B. So moving on to recommended actions, update on school reopening, Acting Director Marsh.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy, wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to update the trustees on the memo we received from the Ministry of Education, a long-awaited memo in terms of the reopening of schools in September. We received it on Friday, June 19th, and in that memo, it outlines a process for us to follow in preparation for local openings, and asks us to work on plans locally to submit to the Ministry of Education through the month of July, and to have plans then submitted to the local health departments by August 4th. Within the memo, it outlines different potentials as far as what we may be encountering next year. It stipulates that attendance at schools will be voluntary based on family choice, and that we will need to plan for some families potentially choosing to continue with a form of remote learning, albeit a more consistent form of remote learning for those at home. It then talks about 3 scenarios, one where we return to normal schooling with enhanced cleaning protocols, a second scenario of adaptive model, really where students aren't attending full time, and we would be having smaller cohorts there at any one time. And the example they use within the document is potentially alternate days or weeks. And then the third one would be that we might encounter a situation where all students need to be learning remotely again, 100% from home. So wanted to flag for you, those are the scenarios that we're currently working on and as a staff. And we're also, from a health and safety perspective, as well as the curriculum side, working within boards of the GTA and very closely with our coterminous board, so that as we develop these models, we are looking to have consistency of practice between the different school boards. It emphasizes, it stipulates a few other pieces of note. One is certainly, and I make reference of it in the report that's provided to you, that they will be reintroducing the requirements for graduates next year of the OSSLT. So either passing of the OSSLT or its equivalent, as well as community service hours, the 40 hours that students are required to serve. And it suggests that potentially students could obtain some of those hours through virtual volunteer work. It also requires us to create a series of protocols that would be available publicly, and of course that would be followed in terms of health and safety primarily. So cleaning protocols, as well as protocols in relation to suspected cases of COVID-19 or a COVID-19 outbreak. Within the document, one of the things that was interesting is that they do distinguish between students with complex needs and suggest, for example, students who are in small class placements, we could potentially have a different sort of program for those individuals compared to others. So we're currently working through, and we have been working through with coterminous board as well as the GTA boards to create some draft plans. And we think we'll be able to share those with you on July 8th. In the meantime, we are also planning a summer institute for our educators. We recognize that next year we're all going to have to be very nimble, working between potentially 4 different scenarios. And so we'll be investing in some professional learning for those over the course of the summer. And so really actually quite excited about the rigorous program we're developing for the Summer Institute in terms of that, as well as focusing on some of the equity work that we want to continue to move forward within the district. We have released or in the process of releasing surveys, very specific surveys, both based on what people have experienced in the last 3.5 months in terms of distance learning, to get feedback from students, parents, families, and staff. And so we will be taking all of that information and building it into our thinking as we try to move forward. But we do understand that the health priority will be what trumps the whole plan. We will need that approval from Durham Department of Health as far as the reopening. Within the document, it talks about September reopening. We have flagged all along to the Ministry of Education the importance of our modified calendar. I have been told that we should be receiving news shortly about calendars because no calendar yet has been approved for the next school year. And with the GSNs coming out last Friday, indicated that they would be turning their attention to the calendar approval process next. However, in the meantime, as part of our survey, we are asking our families if they are registered for modified calendar, would they prefer to start in the normal beginning of August period and engage in remote learning as the first phase of the start, and then move into more physical presence when we have permission for that to happen. So we are trying to build that flexibility into the planning, understanding that for many of our families that is an important option. We also will be continuing to work with our staff and with our federations in terms of what this looks like, understanding that when children are at home and you're expected to be working full-time, that is a challenge. And so we are certainly working with the federations as best as possible. Both OSSTF and ETFO have published papers in terms of their position on what reopening should look like. And there are differences between what they have published and what the Ministry of Education has published. We will be working as diligently as we can be with our federation. We've had significant cooperation, and in fact, the Summer Learning Institute was an idea that they brought to the table, asking us to support the learning of staff for the fall in terms of the different scenarios. So I think in the interest of time, I'll leave it there, but more than happy to take any questions, and understand that we'll be bringing back to you on July 8th, we hope, some more concrete thinking in terms of what these models could look like within the district. Understanding, of course, that transportation will be a real driver as well, in terms of the shared transportation that we have with our coterminous board, but also the requirements of the limited number of students available on the bus at any one time. So happy to have any questions, recognizing that we're still fairly early on in the process.
Thanks, Acting Director Marsh. So I've got Student Trustee West, Trustee Edwards, and Trustee Thatcher. Go ahead, Trustee West.
Thank you. It was just a question with the modified schools. Does that also, the plan, does that also include the high schools that go back a week early and then have November break? Would that also fall under them as well?
It does, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Trustee Edwards.
Just one of the comments around recognizing that boards have been given the okay to have different plans for small class placements, and just one of the concerns that I have heard, if I've actually heard both, but that I know that even today, and we've had where students arrive a little bit before bell or a little bit after bell in order to avoid the congestion in hallways and so forth, as far as students in small class placements. But there is a huge concern to segregating and not having the ability for those small classes to integrate. So to differentiate their schedule significantly from their peers, it basically can have a feeling of segregation and isolation. So I just caution about, how far we do that, because as right now, many of our children with special needs are feeling very much isolated because they do rely on their peers and the social interaction that they have in the school.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Thatcher.
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. Yes, Acting Director Marsh, my question is around data. And I know data has been very important to us as a board for several years. And I'm just wondering, July 8th, with the presentation in July 8th, will there be information around the data? Some of the things I'm interested in is knowing what percentage of kids participated in our distance learning, for example, and along with the feedback. So just wondering if you have any information regarding data.
Thank you. So throughout the process, at different intervals, Superintendent Nevels and Superintendent Macaulay worked collaboratively to collect information in terms of engagement. So we can certainly include those pieces of information because we were looking at the follow-up plans for students that we lost engagement with over the period of time. So we're more than happy to share that. In this most recent survey, we are asking questions about how many hours a day they engaged and what they felt was ideal engagement for them. One of the things we knew from our early thought exchanges was that we had very polarized data on what people wanted. And that made it very tough for us as far as meeting the flexibility that some families really wanted, whereas other families really wanted live and real-time learning. And so that was something that was a challenge for us because of the different desires. As time passed on, I think that we saw a growing desire for more of that real-time learning with families. And from students. So that's something that we will be collecting. We're asking their opinion on it specifically in these surveys. And we're also asking staff about it. And again, the childcare for staff is something that does weigh on us, but we also understand that as this reopening of the province occurs, many people are being expected to return to work without having full-time school. And so we're caught in that same scenario as many employers are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have your hand up, Trustee Burns? I thought it was Trustee Forbes.
Yes,
then.
I did. But I had the questions. No, I'm good. The questions were around the survey and some of the questions that were going to be asked so that we could get the proper data. So Director Nord answered already.
So Trustee Forbes, you're up then.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's just about, as we've learned, and like you said, the wills and desires of our students and their families. But also, have we been collecting, have we examined how well, or I guess the marks are still being tabulated, but those who had regular and consistent engagement versus those who did not. I guess I'm worried if we have to start it from a place where we can't be physically in our schools, and if we're not then having a consistent time when we're interacting with our students, are interacting with learning, how that transition to being in a physical building from 8 to 3 or whatever the bell times are, how that could be just even a greater impact. I know always the transition back in September is difficult, and I'm just wondering, you know, how we're entertaining managing that.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And so one of the things we are looking for come September is certainly a more consistent criteria, because we now have more time on our side and we have the experience of the last 3.5 months. And that's why we are working closely with other district school boards, because there were no requirements put out provincially in this document, at least. Whether or not they'll come, we're not sure. One of the things we've been talking about, because the document does limit us to the size of cohort to approximately 15 students in a class at any one time. And so at secondary, so at elementary, I think we have an advantage in that there's more likely it's one consistent teacher for most of the day. And so that opportunity to get to know the students a little bit better and understanding where they're coming in as far as prior knowledge and learning, and then working with them from where they are to move them forward. There's more advantage because there is a little bit more flexibility in terms of their time with students, where they can on a daily basis figure out how they're going to spend time where they most need to, while meeting the ministry requirements around some specific time allocations. At secondary, we know that that's not the case normally, because a typical secondary student teacher will have about 90 students. They have 76-minute block with them, and then they move forward. But one of the things we've been talking about is potentially looking at a schedule where it wouldn't be all 4 periods in a day, even on the days that the students attend. So for example, it may be that they focus on 2 courses at one time and it's a half-day block. And so if that were the case, and this is just an example that you know, we've been discussing, it does provide a little bit more intensive time to get to know the students really well, and then work with them intensely for a half semester where they would then get that whole credit. So that is one of the things we've talked about as a potential advantage to breaking the day up that way. It also limits the number of students, of mixing students as far as the COVID-19 spreading.
Thank you very much.
I will register as well. One of the things we're aware of for families, when you're looking at alternative days or weeks, that it's going to be important for us to create a system between secondary and elementary, where it's not that the secondary students are in school one day and the elementary another day. We are going to be looking at that sort of information as well, as much as possible, to try to build some consistency there.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards, you had a question?
Just on that note, I'm just thinking as families that rely on older siblings to walk their kid, their younger sibling to school. If the younger sibling ends up going full day and the older sibling is a half a day, then you're going to have a problem where, you know, that older sibling isn't available to walk that child back home. So I mean, there's those things to consider, that family cohort, as you know, and what their real life situation is too. It's going to be very difficult to time to have. I don't envy, but yeah, just some concern around the family.
There's many people here tonight around this virtual table, as well as in the province of Ontario. There's a lot of flurry of activity of different ideas. Just to clarify, when I spoke about spending a half day with the student, that would be with one teacher for one. So it would be 2 courses they would take. One course would be the morning block. Second course would be the afternoon block at secondary. Okay. Yeah, but they would still be a full day when they're there.
Okay.
Great. Trustee Lundquist, go ahead.
I might be like completely out in left field on this. I acknowledge that, but is there any consideration about different geographic areas having perhaps different needs? Because it would seem to me that I recognize we're one school board, but the numbers are not the same throughout the whole district, right? They're very specific to particular areas, and I'm wondering if our plan
accounts for that in any way, because there might be more flexibility in areas where, well, let's be frank, where there is less of a viral occurrence.
Yeah, so we haven't talked about that explicitly at this point, Trustee Lindquist. It's not to say it wouldn't be possible, and it may be, for example, when we look at the details of the COVID-19 protocols as far as suspected case or outbreak, where we start to distinguish based on what the numbers are looking like in the fall. So the model that we're looking at, one of the things we have talked about is as much as possible, staff not traveling between, which again presents some limitations and not always possible, but we are examining that as an example. So there is the potential there where a particular geographic area, because of an outbreak, might be in a different circumstance than others within the district. Yes.
Supplemental, please. So I think that that's actually really important, and I just want to, you know, we talked about family cohorting, but cohorting generally is really important. We saw that in long-term care, right, where people were traveling from location to location, and that's something that I am particularly worried about, having seen firsthand and secondhand exactly the damage that can be caused and how rapidly it can happen. So I'm hopeful that the school board is taking that into consideration quite seriously. There are vulnerable populations amongst the school population as much as there are in long-term care homes, and I just think it's really important that we understand that isolation, that cohorting, as it's called, actually occurs if at all possible and in every way possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Acting Director Marsh. Seeing no further questions, we'll then move on to our item B. Student Trustee Mesre is her suggested motion. And as I said, what I'm going to do is allow her to present that. But before we can discuss it as around the table of trustees, we will need a member of the board to either move that. We also need one to second it before we can enter into discussion on it. But I'm going to allow Sally to and support her speaking to that before we get to that stage. So go ahead, Student Trustee Mesre.
Thank you very much. I hope you guys are all having a good evening. So you have all heard me talk at length, and if you follow my Twitter in depth, about the importance of education. And so I want to kind of begin this with a quote. And so it says, "Education beyond all other devices of human origin is the great equalizer of the condition of men." Horseman, 1837. As a school board, we definitely take great strides to make equity a reality. And we also take great strides to be responsive to the people within the education system whom we serve. However, in order for our school board to be fully equitable, it must be fully responsive to a wide variety of individuals in our school board and the students that we serve. And that includes secondary students, but it also includes students from a variety of backgrounds, ages, and kind of lived experiences. And the central purpose of this motion comes down to that quote, that we need to make education equitable. And to make it equitable, we need to make it responsive. And the purpose of this motion is to make it to make our education system as responsive as possible to the people who we are accountable to. So the way I'm going to kind of go through this is I'm going to outline the three enhancements to the education system that are being proposed, followed by the impetus for why those are important to include. So it begins with enfranchising students in grades 7 and 8 to be able to vote, followed by allowing student senators and other students to be able to sit on committees of the board that are not sanctioned by the Education Act. So this would pertain to education finance, for example, as that is not actually allowed within the Education Act, but committees of the board that are not kind of confidential, and then followed by developing an elementary senate or kind of an elementary body quite similar to something that we have at the secondary level. And so when we talk about to begin with, enfranchising and giving the rights of students to vote that are in grades 7 and 8. As of right now, the position of student trustee is elected by students in grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, but they represent students in grades 10, 11, and 12. So a student entering the education system, entering high school, doesn't actually have a say in who their elected representative at the school board is. So from the moment a student enters the high school arena, there is already a gap in the student voice apparatus that our school board employs, because they do not elect their representative. If we want students to be involved and yet they don't actually have a say in who is representing them, then we have already kind of diagnosed the fact that they are not actually involved and they don't actually have a tangible say. And it's one thing to encourage students to be involved, but it's another thing to provide the mechanisms for them to be involved. And we don't actually have the kind of ability to do that. I would note that we opened up a student senate meeting to allow students in grades 7 and 8 to partake in the student voice that we engage in on a monthly basis. And we had approximately 45 to 55% of our participants were in grades 7 and 8. And so based on that, we can see that there is, if we take the old supply and demand adage, there is a demand of students in younger grades in grades 7 and 8 to be involved in student voice processes. However, there is not the supply of a mechanism for them to be meaningfully involved. And electing people who represent them is a meaningful mechanism for them to be involved. And so it's important that we recognize both what we are asking of students, but as well what we are providing to engage them in a meaningful process of representation, and of course inspiring them as well to be involved. Next, when we talk about providing the means for student senators primarily, or other students, to be involved in committees of the board, as a student trustee, our passion and our heart lies with this school board. However, we have school, we have other activities, we have families that we also are a part of, and it's difficult to be at every committee meeting to be able to discuss the topics that are at hand. However, those committee meetings need student voice, and where student trustees aren't able to be there, it's important that we provide another student voice for that to be allowed. As well, I would note that the committees are varied at our school board. We have, CEAC, we have the Education and Equity Committee as well. And when we actually open the pipeline of people who can be involved in those committees, we're actually going to see a more specialized interest of students. So for example, if a student center is interested in special education, they might actually have more expertise than a student trustee, and having them sit on a CEAC committee would provide specialized student voice to that committee. And so it would, in essence, provide student voice that potentially wouldn't be there. And so it's important that we recognize that student trustees, while they do represent students, they're not the only student voice, and we need to diversify the student voices that we hear at the board table, not just our voices, but all student voices. And by implementing something like that, we are creating a mechanism for them to be able to gather student voice that is meaningful. And then following along with the development of a elementary senate, if we'd like to call it that. So, there's this notion that, not every student wants to become a student trustee or revolutionize education as we know it. But what is necessary for some is good for all. And when we create processes where we engage students that are in grades 7 and 8 in the processes of our board, we are elevating the collective student voice. We are providing a mechanism for students that are passionate about student voice and students that maybe aren't passionate about student voice to be involved in the board processes. And I would note that not every student wants to change things completely, but every student wants to matter in the place that they learn. And in fact, they can't learn until they matter to the board and the education institutions which they're a part of. So by developing a means of gathering student voice for students in grades 7 and 8, we are creating a mechanism where we are gathering student voice, we're telling them they matter, and we're listening to them in a way that we haven't before, and that we don't actually have a process to do currently at this point. And so I would note that these three changes are by no means revolutionary. They are by no means a stretch of the imagination. These are just tiny steps towards making our board more representative and gathering of student voice, and thus more equitable. And from the time that we spent at the board, 2 years we've spent at the board, every single initiative, every single report, every single thing that we have done at this board has ultimately been about enhancing student voice and making it more equitable. And the foundation of that is based off of is what is presented to you here today. It is the kind of the zeitgeist of our time that we are capturing and that we are attempting to implement, because we understand that it's important, and that, you know, if we don't provide these means for our students, we are not allowing them to thrive in a way that they could. As a school board and as an education institution, we do not provide students with passion, or we don't instill in them inspiration or potential. What we do is provide a means for them to demonstrate the potential that is already within them. And through enacting these things, we are providing a mechanism for our future leaders to demonstrate the potential and the passion and the talents they have to improve themselves and their communities. And so I trust that, you know, upon reflection and upon, you know, your understanding of what students need, we can find a way to enhance student voice, make it responsive to the student populace, which we all have the pleasure of serving. Thank you very much. And pleased to take any questions, of course.
Thank you, Sally. Before we take any questions, and before we have a discussion on this, we need to have a mover of one of the trustees and also someone seconding that. I see your hand up there, Trustee Noble.
Yeah, I'm willing to move this to debate because I believe that student voice is important. And if our student trustees have something they want us to share and listen to, I think we should give them the opportunity to share that and discuss it.
Okay, so it's moved by Trustee Noble. I need someone to second that. We can enter into a discussion. Trustee Lundquist? Okay. All in favor? Is anybody opposed?
Sorry. All in favor.
Go ahead, Trustee Barrett. You got your hand up?
In favor of what? Sorry.
What, are you in favor of passing or in favor of discussing?
Just discussing the motion.
Okay,
Correct.
sorry.
So I just wanted to be clear that that's what I was supporting, was the discussion.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Trustee Barrett and Trustee Edwards, or is it's just the same question?
Yeah, thank you. I was just seeking clarification because, sorry, Chris, or Chair Brainy, when you asked for all in favor, I thought we were going right to passing the motion. So that's why I was kind of, you know, doing the dance here. So
no, I just wanted to make
okay.
I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to make sure everyone else was on board with that too. We had a mover and a seconder just to make sure that we can enter into discussion.
Okay, so I'm just seeking some clarification. Number one, I'm not opposed to the motion. I have expressed this to Sally. I'm opposed to the process. Special board meetings have very distinct rules with regards to being able to add things to the agenda. We have broken process, number one. Number two is, is this a notice of motion? Or is this a debate that we're entering into being able to pass it? Because I'm not sure that fits within the requirements of how we go forward with motion. So I'm just seeking some clarification.
Trustee Barrett, just to let you know, I have also mentioned this to Student Trustee Meseret too, just the process. However, she was very adamant that we put this on the agenda this evening and have this discussion. So hearing that and understanding the importance of what she's trying to get across, I figured that it was a good opportunity to at least have a discussion about that. And obviously, these scenarios are always up to the board, so it's just trying to get guidance. But I felt it was important to put on the agenda this evening. I do understand what you're saying, and I think you're correct, and I have expressed that our process. And so
I appreciate that, Chair Brainy, and as I've expressed to Sally offline, I don't object to what's being discussed nor the sentiments discussed. The process isn't being followed. So I'll leave it at that. But I would suggest that we could always come back to this and say the process isn't being followed, so this discussion isn't really within the framework. But I too understand what you're saying, Chair, with regards to the importance. I've said to Sally, it's just that, you know, it's process, and I'll stop at that point. Thanks, Chair Brady.
If I may also comment, I definitely appreciate the importance of process, and we should, by all means, hold stringent and hold fast to the governance that takes place, and I do appreciate that. Certainly, I would also note that the processes of our board are intended to facilitate the discussions and the importance of discussions that we have, and that we are, as a school board, we are able to amend, and we're able to create processes with that fall relatively close to the guidelines in order to facilitate the things that we need to discuss. We are bound by the rules, but we also have the autonomy to ensure the rules are able to encompass the importance of the discussions that have happened. I'd note that within the school board, we've missed 2 board meetings, which is entirely unprecedented. And I think that we have to hold fast to process, but process should not inhibit the important work that is important for us to complete, and that we do need to complete.
Could I just hear from the other 2 student trustees? Could I go to Trustee Wang and then Trustee West? Just kind of want to get some feedback from the 2 of you. What I want to do then is ask our board counsel, Patrick Cotter, just based around what Trustee Barrett had to say, if we have this discussion and we enter into something, is it something that could be retracted because we haven't followed process? But I'll get to that in a second. Trustee Wang and Trustee West, go ahead. Trustee Wang first, go ahead.
Thank you. I'd firstly like to say I very much support the premise that is behind this motion. I similarly feel that it's very important that we empower our younger students and also ensure that we're maintaining and strengthening that board connection that we have with our intermediate students. But I do think that this motion has big implications that must be thought through and worked through before this can pass tonight. For one, I'd like to note that we have over 100 elementary schools at the board, and this has obviously a very big impact on how our student trustee elections would run, as well as that elementary student senate. As the current voting process works, I'm not sure if this is something that we can include over 100 elementary schools when we currently involve 18 secondary schools in our voting process. And I'm not entirely sure if elementary students would fully understand what the role of student trustee is before they're able to be able to vote on it. Potentially, I think that there needs to be that student senate portion that needs to be addressed before we can also include them in student trustee elections. And I also feel that this motion could have benefited from consultation with our student senate as well as our incoming student trustees. I think their voice is also very important, as this would directly impact their work. I think the secondary student senate would have a lot to say about what an elementary student senate would look like, but I'm looking forward to hearing what other trustees have to say. Thank you.
So thank you for your feedback. So you're saying that you think that maybe we should table this for a discussion perhaps in the fall with student senate and trustees at that point in time? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think this is something that should pass tonight.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Trustee Mesere, I need to go to Trustee West. Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee West.
Thank you. My general feeling is similar to Trustee Wang's, although not exactly the same. To be very clear, I am speaking on behalf of myself and my experience here, and who I represent. We're not united in this front as a student trustee front tonight, unfortunately. So I agree with the general sentiment of the motion. I agree with empowering elementary students. You guys have heard me talk for 2 years straight about the importance of student voice at the table. I do not agree with the process for which this is followed. So I'm going to walk through these points one by one and give explanation as to my thinking behind them and how I feel based on what I've experienced and how I believe this should proceed. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that based upon the draft that was sent out earlier tonight, the first point, be it further resolved that student trustee election policy be amended for the franchisement of students in grade 7 to vote in student trustee elections. It was grade 8 was also mentioned in Trustee Meseret's speech tonight. So I just wanted to get clarification on whether that is including grade 7s and 8s, but that can happen after the fact. Diving into that point though, there are some pretty broad implications that could spiral very quickly in a negative direction with this part of the motion. First being, when we say we want to have franchisements of students in grade 7 and potentially grade 8, once we get clarification on that, does that mean that all grade 7s and all grade 8s are voting? This is not clear from this motion, and it's not well represented. I'd like to note that currently we have a system set up where there are 10 students from every secondary school that vote in the student trustee elections. And this is for a very important purpose, because let's say you have 1,500 kids at Oxford. I'm going to use my district in the north. We have 375 roughly students at Brock High School, and they get 10 students to represent them. And then we have 1,200 or 1,500 or something like that students at Oxford Secondary School. If we were to go to a system where even if just the grade 7s and 8s were everybody were voting, that would not work, because then you would always have a school like Oxford or Port Perry in my case winning, and Brock would never stand a chance if we have everyone voting. So because that is not clear in this motion, I would not feel comfortable proceeding with it in that way. And this is really about upholding the credibility of the system to make sure that every school has a fair chance at electing their student trustee. For the second part of the motion, I generally support the idea that school board committee policy should be amended to enable student senators to serve on committees of the board in lieu of student trustees if appointed by the student senate and or student trustees to provide input and unique perspectives. To me, this looks like a point that is really can't have a negative impact. Worst comes to worst, they don't end up appointing them. So I'd be in support of that second resolution. The third resolution, a policy is developed to support the development of an elementary student senate for students with upper elementary grades to provide student perspectives, feedback, and advocacy as engaged in by the existing student senate. I would actually also agree with this point, but I believe that there should be a committee developed to create policy around this, to create the framework for which this is made. Not necessarily we're diving right into the policy as is in the motion, but rather a committee be developed to support the development of an elementary student senate. And then at a further date, likely far down the line, once elementary students, the current student senate, the acting student trustees at the time, elementary teachers, our board staff, and all parties have been consulted on that committee, then we can put it together a framework for that elementary student senate to exist. But I am in support of the general idea, just not the exact wording of those second two resolutions. But when it comes to the franchisement of grade 7 and 8 students, there needs to be a lot more forethought put into that. And I'm open to further discussions being happened in the future with the next set of student trustees and next student senate. But there has to be very particular thought into giving all schools equitable access at electing a student trustee. And that will close my argument on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Student Trustee West. At this time, and it's to go back, myself and every single trustee around this table supports and encourages student voice. Well, Trustee Barrett, I agree with what he's had to say. We felt it was important to hear what you've all had to say, and certainly maybe some directives of moving forward. But at this time, I just want to turn it over to our board, Council Patrick Cotter, because I don't believe that I don't want to breach process. I realize that we have one, but we also felt it was important to hear what each of you had to say. So I'm just going to turn it over to Patrick Cotter to give us or summarize what we could or couldn't do at this point in time and stage in this with this conversation. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Chair Brainy, and through you. So to Trustee Barrett's point, as this is a special meeting, it's in order to have an additional business conducted at the special meeting, there must be unanimous consent by all board members. But in that circumstance, additional business can be considered. But there are other complications with this motion. I think the first one is, having looked at it quickly, in my view, the motion would require amendment to bylaw 14, which must be tabled at a regular board meeting, and then needs to go from board meeting to the next regular board meeting for the bylaw to be amended. So I think the first two prongs of the first three prongs of the motion will require an amendment to the bylaw, and I'm happy to elaborate on that if you have follow-up questions in that regard. I would also have concern, the board can only amend a bylaw if it's not contrary to statute. I would have concerns, I just flag it as a concern, don't have the answer tonight, but I would flag a concern as to whether the board could amend the bylaw. It may violate Section 55 of the Education Act, which provides that student trustees are elected to represent the interests of pupils in the last 2 years of intermediate division and in the senior division, which is grades 9 to 12. So I would have concerns that allowing grade 7 and 8s to vote would dilute the statutory right of students in grades 9 to 12 to have student trustee representatives. So that diluting that vote could be contrary to the Education Act. I don't see any particular legal issue around the fourth prong, which is the student senate for elementary pupils. But subject to any comments here, questions you may have, those are my preliminary comments, Chair Brainy.
Before I go to questions or comments, I think to maybe frame this, and based on the comments that we received from, first of all, I do agree that we're out of process. However, and hearing the comments from the student trustees, what I would suggest is there an opportunity that we've heard the intent and sort of the some of the conversations and topics that you want to discuss to maybe revamp something and enhance student voice, which I believe we're all in favor with. But I believe this might be a good opportunity to see if maybe one of you, and I would say student trustee Mesre brought this forward, if there was a way to carry this forward and table this and hand this off to the new group of student trustees to have a fulsome conversation with student senate and get them and have a number of people around the table to sort of guide that. And I do believe that many of the things that she has had to say, as all the student trustees have had to say, that there's probably some merit in some of the go forwards with this. However, having it done through student senate and passed on, and having proper voice around that table and having it collectively worked on, I think maybe something really good could come out of that process if we push that to the fall, so we're not breaching any process. However, this time I'll take, I have Trustee Barnes, Crawford, Trustee Lundquist, and then Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. My concern was also around process. I think there was a lot of, and looking at the motion, I like the student. There's a lot of pieces that need to be looked at before this motion could go forward. I think there's an opportunity to really develop maybe grade 7 and 8, their own student government voice that probably ties into the Senate before it gets to the point where we're at. But I think this is something that deserves a lot more discussion, and I don't really think it should be added to this agenda today.
Thank you, Trustee Barnes. Trustee Crawford?
Well, I guess my concerns are on process too, right from when this started. And maybe I should have introduced a point of order, but and what Michael said is quite correct. And what you're saying, Chair, is quite correct too. We probably allowing the discussion is not so damaging, but there's a process to go through to introduce something like this with proper notice and giving everybody a chance to read over what needs to be done and then bringing it forward at a properly called meeting. So by all means, I think the advice that you're giving to go to another process is what we should be doing. And as to unanimous consent, I'm not even sure if that's correct. And we would probably give unanimous consent because we didn't want to insult anybody, but we're still not doing it as per process.
Trustee Lundquist, go ahead.
So I'm a lawyer, I like process, but I also recognize that discussion is vital. And I'm not upset that we're talking about it. I don't think there's anything problematic about talking about it at all. I think making a decision on it would be, and I can't get around that, Sally, however much I'd like to. But I want to say a couple of things. And I'm not going to speak to the very specifics of the motion, but there are some things behind it that I think are really important. So I do believe that a lack of agency is a lost opportunity, and that you see a kind of precipitous drop in engagement as kids get older. So the idea that you might want to engage them sooner makes a ton of sense to me, and I'm sure it does to the other trustees as well. That being said, I think it's a problem to presume that there's only one way to incorporate student voice. There are other opportunities and different ways of doing that, and I'm certainly not going to presume that this is the way that those students would want, and if they haven't been engaged on that, I think it would be unfair to presume that.
I think we lost.
I think so.
Yeah.
In September, and to do whatever is necessary to have a fulsome discussion. But right now, I think that I think it's a bit premature, and I don't know how to get beyond that.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Edwards?
I concur with a lot of what was said around process, and although I see merit in as far as and you know, we all really like hearing student voice, and I just the ramifications you know attached to this, and to tell you the truth, when you're talking about student voice, I think it has merit to go to the new student trustees come in, but maybe that's not their priority. And I feel a little bit awkward providing them, you know, yes, it's from your recommendation to the next student senate, which is great, but I still feel very awkward providing them, sort of feeding them something that they need to agree on what they might want to see as priority at this. I'm not saying that it's not valid. I'm just saying I just have a little, because that's what they're for. They're there to represent the student population as for their year, and so I wouldn't want to presume that we're feeding this to them when they might have another priority that is at this point in time. The other thing that I might note that I kind of find it interesting that, you know, student voice, we push for and the student trustees do a wonderful job, but I have gone to done presentations at high school and elementary about trustees, and through, you know, governance that they start learning in the municipal government and so forth, and very rarely though do I at the elementary to learn even the grade 5 social studies around governance. About, they talk about municipal, but that's that's a great opportunity for students to actually start talking about what a student trustee does at that level. As far as, so I think there's also some influence that we can do, even if we don't get there, where we can start introducing and what the role of student trustee is and the importance of student trustee and getting their voice out there. And then ensuring that when you start looking at some of the grade 10 curriculum around governance, that they start bringing in student trustees and trustees to talk about that as well. But anyways, again, I have a problem with the governance and the process, but I do, look at the motion and has very good merit. But I agree, with student trustee West, that it really should go back to the Senate a bit, and the new Senate, and have them discussion and put their voice behind it on what they want to see.
So I'm going to give, well, I see Trustee Moritz put her hand up. I was going to give you the last word, Trustee Meseret. Did you want me to bypass and just go to Trustee Morton so that I could give you the last word on this?
I mean, I've already been skipped over before, so not a problem. I'd be happy to go
Okay.
afterwards.
Trustee Morton, go ahead. Okay, maybe she's taken it back. Go ahead, Trustee Meseret.
I think Carolyn was on mute.
Okay.
Thank you. Sally, I want you to know I firmly believe in student voice. I love working with intermediate students. We want to provide them with a voice. Have you approached elementary students and asked them if they'd like to participate in this way?
I can address that, and then I will address the litany of things I need to address.
Thank
so
you.
yes, it wasn't actually, I didn't even have to go to the elementary students. The elementary students came to us. We said, we're running a meeting, and they all came. They said, how do we get involved? Why don't I know about this? What opportunities are there for me? We didn't have enough time to be able to answer all their questions. Students are asking to be involved. It is the impetus that students are saying to us that we need to find a way to have them involved. It's not us pushing this on them. But I do think I just want to note, but I just want to note a few things. Number one, I've just written a few things down. There was this notion brought up that there's a lot of students in our board, and so it's going to be difficult. But you know what? We are a school board. We set the governance. If we determine that something is of importance, then we set the standard for what takes place, and we create mechanisms for them to be enacted. That's what leadership is. It's about setting the tone, taking that first stand, and allowing people to follow. That is the epitome of what leadership is. So I'll note that. However, some of the legalities. So I'll note that Section 55 was referenced and upper grades were referenced. So when it's referring to senior students, that is referring to individuals who can serve as a student trustee. It is not referring to individuals who can elect student trustees. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because there is no legal reasoning for why a student in grade 7 and 8 cannot elect a student trustee. In fact, it is actually it doesn't make sense for them not to, because that means students in grade 9 do not have any say in the individual that's electing them. Students in grade 10 to 12 are the ones that are electing student trustees. So I just want to clear that up, that there is nothing within the Education Act that inhibits students in grade 7 and 8 from voting. Second of all, I guess that's not my second point, but I just think it's important to clear that up. And as well, I think that there are, process. I think I've heard process quite a bit, and I think the queasiness we're having with this has little to do with process, because I think everyone has noted the importance of what's being outlined. It's an inability to enact change, and I just note that, you know, student voice that isn't tokenistic is always silenced, and we always find a way to inhibit it. And I'm not insinuating that we don't value student voice, but what I'm insinuating is that when it is enacted in reality, we have a problem with recognizing that it has the power to really fundamentally change things. So while I would appreciate this motion being passed, and while I would appreciate the enfranchisement of students grades 7 and 8, while I would appreciate students serving on board committees, while I appreciate the development of an elementary senate, what I would appreciate even more is that we value student voice, and that when it presents itself in excellence and truth and predicated on things that need to change, that we listen to it and that we enact it. And I would hope that the next student trustees that come after me, they get their motions passed and they bring things forward that is based on things that, you know, haven't been discussed before, and they are passed. And so this is certainly not the end of this. I'm sure this is a conversation that will continue to happen. It's something that's enacted in school boards across Ontario. So it's certainly not a new concept. And I know that Durham will, you know, we'll catch up, we'll get there. And I know that student voice will not stop being strong. It will continue to be strong, and it will continue to change things, because the most authentic student voice is the student voice that changes things. And I want us to change, and I know the people that come after me will enact changes, even if we aren't able to at this moment. So I am eternally optimistic that student voice will eventually prevail. And that concludes that concludes my remarks on this topic.
Thank you. At this time, and given the given our legal counsel's advice, also with many trustees around the table knowing certainly our process, I am going to rule this out of order, and hopefully we have a discussion with Student Senate, and as your colleagues have said, Trustee Mesere, to at least allow that. They felt that there was some fairness there, your other two colleagues. However, I'm still glad that we had the conversation. I think that there were some good points that came out of this, and I appreciate you bringing it forward, and I appreciate everybody's comments towards it this evening. So that being said, we're going to move on to adjournment. Could I have someone move adjournment for us this evening? Trustee Morton and Trustee Edwards, you second that? Great. All in favor? Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.